Welcome to Monologues by Hassie, where I'm going to be dropping unsolicited brain dumps from the depths of my grey matter. I'll talk about life, money, society, and self-development, plus whatever else lies up there, whilst hopefully not getting cancelled in the process. When we first start to learn something new, especially if you're new to learning in general, because I think learning is such an important skill. There's learning what you want to learn, but then there's learning how to learn. And a big component of learning how to learn is how to set goals which are actually going to help you achieve success in a new skill that you want to learn. If I look at the last 10 years of my life, I've picked up so many different things, be it books I wanted to read, courses I wanted to finish, in addition to university, so it would have required effort. There wasn't a forced deadline forcing me to complete them. Things like learning a language, which I've talked about, starting and failing. French is one of those, definitely still on the bucket list. But if I look at why I failed a lot of those endeavors, it's because I set goals where I didn't receive enough positive feedback soon enough, and that caused me to lose interest in those particular areas and consequently put them to a side. If I take something small from my current life, I've been learning how to code in the last, 3 to 4 years, and it's really ramped up in the last year. I got into data analytics and I decided I wanted to get out of data analytics and get into software engineering, and I knew that the team at work who I worked with, they used a language called C#. So I said I wanted to get some C# practice, and I just needed to find some sort of resource where I could make little C# apps and solve problems and just get very comfortable with the language. So I actually found something called the Euler project. It's actually spelt like the Euler project. It's EULER. And it's basically a website which has a bunch of mathematical problems. And these problems, you can solve them however you want. But generally, you need to use, not generally, actually, almost always, you need to use a computer because these problems are so complex that you can't write them out on a piece of paper. It's not algebra. It's not something you can solve in a few sheets of paper. You need to write a little program to solve that mathematical problem and get the answer, because it's just far too complex, right? There's too many rounds of calculations, too many options you need to consider. For many reasons, these problems aren't easy to solve by humans. But what we can do is, once we've worked out a method for how to solve them, we can instruct a computer how to do that. Now, it's agnostic to language, meaning you can use whatever programming language you want. So I said, I want to solve these in C#. Now, I could have just arbitrarily started doing these problems, but what I actually did is, when I looked at the archive of these problems, I said, well, I need to set a goal for this particular project. Now, there's 800 problems in there. First of all, it's not realistic that I'm going to go and solve 800, because whilst these are problems that do require, basic understanding of programming, they also understand they require you to understand mathematics. And I said, okay, that's kind of like two birds in one stone, and it's going to get increasingly more complex. But I said, I need to set a goal that is going to motivate me and where I'm going to feel good when I complete it. So naturally, every kind of problem I solve, it's positive validation, but you also need, a bit of a stretch goal. Now, the question is, when you're new to something, where do you set a stretch goal? If you set a goal that's too easy for you, what's going to happen to you is you're going to finish it, you're going to get bored, and if you get bored, you're going to stop doing it. And then the counter side to that is, if you set a goal that's way too hard, right? If I said, there's 800 problems in the Euler project, and I'm going to finish 800 of them, and that's when I'm going to feel happy about myself, that's just straight up depression, right? You're in a point where the goal is so far away that you're likely to give up because you're just not receiving any positive validation. So when I decided upon a goal for the Euler project, right, these little programming challenges where I solve mathematical problems, I looked at how many people have solved, and the Euler project is beautiful in the sense that it actually tells you how many people have solved each problem. And this isn't a rule, but typically what happens is more people have solved problem 1 than the number of people who have solved problem 800. And there's a very stark difference between the people who start off solving Euler project problems and the people who actually finish the problems at the end. So if I look at the people who start the Euler project, generally the first thing they're going to do is they're going to do question 1, and that's been solved by approximately 1 million people. I'm rounding up, of course, but 1 million people is a lot of people. And then if I look at the people who've solved the very last problem, the last problem's been solved by 400. Now, for the purpose of doing some very simple mathematics, I'm going to round that up to 500. And if you look at the percentage of people who got right to the end and who had the ability to solve those problems to the end, not just the ability, I'm going to be very clear. It's not just ability. I'm sure there are a lot of people who could do Euler project problems, but it's the people who decided that this is a goal I want to pursue, and they applied effort over a period of time, right? Because we can't do everything in the world, so there's only going to be a subset of people who do anything. But if you look at the percentage of people who got right to the end of the Euler project, it's about 0.05% of everyone who started. So it's such a small percentage who got right to the top. So if I made that my goal, I wouldn't be happy, because the amount of time, effort involved in that wouldn't be worth what I would be getting out. So when I looked at the number of people who were solving these problems, one thing I realized is by the time you get to 20 problems, you go from 1 million people having solved problem 1 to about 200,000 people having solved problem 20. Now, 200,000 people represents 20% of all the people who have attempted Euler project problems. So I basically said, let's get to the top 20%. And you only have to do 20 problems. Out of 800 problems, if you just solve the first 20, right? You basically get into the top. You're better than 80% of the people who started this. And the effort to reward ratio is so high. And obviously there's the law of the law of diminishing marginal gains, which states that the longer you keep doing something, when you start off doing something just like that, the first 20 problems, I'm going to get to 20%, the top 20%. But if I want to get to the top 10%, I've got to do so many more problems. I've got to do way more problems than 20 to get to the top 10%. If I want to get to the top 1%, I'll be doing hundreds of problems to get to that level. And naturally, if you want to get right to the top, you'll be doing the whole 800 to get to that very kind of elite status. It's the same if we look at any other domains like sports, music. You can get very good. And then if you want to be absolutely amazing, that's kind of where you dedicate your life to that area. So looking at this Euler project, this pool of math questions which you solve using programming as a subset, I set a goal where if I hit that goal, I got a spike of dopamine, which would make me happy. And it's not even about that particular project, but it just makes me more confident as a software engineer. I've created a metric where I derive dopamine with a reasonable amount of effort, right? Solving 20 problems, not 800 problems. That's a huge difference. Now, if you look at other domains where people generally want to succeed, let's take a look at getting fit. If your goal is to improve the composition of your body and you've weighed yourself and you know your height and you've calculated your BMI, let's say your BMI is, it's above 25, which is in the range where, and I know BMI is not a perfect figure because you could have, it's not a perfect metric. You could be extremely muscular, in which case, your BMI could be high, but you'll probably be a lot healthier than somebody else who's at that BMI but doesn't have as much muscle. If I look at BMI, and when I look at the statistics for BMI in the United States, this is kind of shocking, but if you get your BMI down to 22, you are in the top 9% of adults in America. That's if you're a male. I think it's very similar for if you're a female. So if you get your BMI to 22, you are literally going to be in the top 10% of people in terms of weight, like the weight to height ratios, which is absolutely crazy. So, if weight is a part of the equation to attractiveness, you can literally get that component up to the top 10% by getting your BMI to 22. Now, this is very different to people who say, I want to get my body fat percentage down to 12%, where I'm going to start to see all these abs, which is a very hard goal for somebody starting off. But imagine if you just started off by saying, I want to get my BMI to 22. And of course, the effort involved to get there is going to be different to anyone. But 22 isn't even a really, it's not like a super lean BMI. But by getting to that level, you're basically going to be in the top 10% of people, at least if you're in the United States. If you look at wealth, if you get to 100,000 Australian dollars, you're in the top 1% of the world. If your annual income is 10,000 Australian dollars, then I wrote these figures down, you're basically in the top 30% of the world, which is crazy. Now, if you're listening to this and you're living in a country like Australia, the UK, US, where cost of living is high, you can probably find the equivalent calculator not for the world, but for your country. Where do you rank? And if one of your goals is, I want to become more wealthy, you can set a metric that way, but even simpler, just look at what you're earning now and apply a simple multiple of that. If you're making 40,000 a year now, say, how can I make 80,000 a year? For example, one of my personal finance goals is every year, I want to add 1,000 Australian dollars in passive income. And the difference of passive income is that it's income that's not actively earned. So for me, the easiest way to make $1,000 in passive income is to buy an appropriate number of shares and ETFs, which return dividends and distributions. And that is income I earned without actively exchanging time. Now, of course, I had to exchange time to earn the money to buy those equities, but the income I make off that is passive. There are other ways to make passive income, but that's just one of the strategies that I can use to hit that goal. And it's not a crazy goal given where I live in the world. And that's the thing. Based on where you are in the world and based on your circumstances, you should set goals where you can get a sufficient amount of dopamine where it's not too easy. It's got to be challenging. I think that's a key. If you set goals that are too easy, well, it's the same as setting a goal that's too hard. You're not going to get anywhere. So you need to find this point, this very fine region, this balance of where a goal is just challenging enough. For me, passive income is a challenging goal because I've grown up in a paradigm where active income is all I've known. I've been told to study, to get a job, and that's kind of it. So investing and earning income passively is challenging. I guess now that I've been doing it for a few years, making income through equities is a bit easier, but there are other ways, other forms of passive income, having digital products, things which you create once and people consume many times, scale. That's, I guess, the next challenge for me. So when you're thinking about your goals, maybe it's you're learning a language, maybe you want to speak German. How are you going to set your goal? Maybe you want to make your goal extremely simple. Maybe your goal is, I want to be able to order my meal at a cafe or a restaurant. And I want to be able to, that conversation has to go for 1 minute. Imagine if that was your metric and that's all you cared about. You didn't care about learning grammar or rules or, how to conjugate verbs. I don't even know what I'm talking about. But imagine if you made your goal, I want to be able to order my meal in German, and that's all I want to be able to do. And imagine if you went to a German cafe where you lived, or you happened to be, you knew a German friend and you were able to have that 1 minute interaction, you got them to help you out, or you found a tutor online that could do that, and that's what you achieved. Imagine how good you would feel, because that's not an easy goal, being able to hold a conversation in another language for a minute. So when we are setting goals, it's just, I will reiterate once again, be very careful about how you set your goals, because I think the people who succeed, and if I look at the people who do well, they don't start off saying, I want to become a billionaire overnight, right? If we look at Jeff Bezos, he didn't start off by saying, I want to become a billionaire, but he's probably set increasingly harder goals. And when he hits those goals, naturally your competence goes up, so you set a harder goal and you keep going. And that cycle of development, that cycle of setting good goals has such a big impact on our success in the long term. And with that said, I wish you great success with all your endeavors. You've just made it through another episode of Monologues by Hassie. It brings me great pleasure to know that you made it to the end. To listen to more episodes, subscribe on your favorite podcast app or visit monologuesbyhassie.com. Thanks for swinging by.